Leanne Bruni in the audience? Thank you, Leanne. Leanne's question is, 1 in 4 children in the UK live in poverty. Bearing this in mind, shouldn't our priority be eliminating poverty in the UK as opposed to abroad? Matthew?
Straight away, that's a figure of relative poverty. You cannot eliminate relative poverty. It's not possible. It's not absolute poverty they live in. So that's the problem with that figure. It's a very simple answer, but you can't eliminate relative poverty.
So if you can't eliminate relative poverty, then why are we trying to eliminate poverty around the world? Because that's relative to.
That's absolute poverty.
Well, I think absolute poverty is the point. I mean, those on less than $1 a day or $1.10, whatever it is now. Yes. But the point is, if you set a thing that says you are in poverty if your income is at 60% of the national average, which is how relative poverty is assigned, you're always going to have people who are in relative poverty. It's always going to happen. Yes. Well, the debate over this doesn't. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Clearly, the governments, the coalition governments, have put in place a number of measures to deal with poverty in the UK amongst children, and that is why, for instance, we have invested very heavily in free school meals. So, for instance, reception Year 1, Year 2 pupils will get free school meals. That helps to address poverty in terms of, for parents, it's worth about £400 a year to a parent. We've provided free nursery education for 3 and 4-year-olds. We're now providing free nursery education for 40% of 2-year-olds. So there are measures that the UK government are taking to try and address poverty, particularly poverty amongst children. But I think, as Matthew said, the issue about relative poverty is that you could have a situation where people were living comfortably at home, but 60% of the population had a much larger disposable income, and you would find people in relative poverty. So I think and I don't think you can make a comparison with what is happening in developing countries and say, well, it's relative to them. If they're living off $1 a day, that's fine because $1 a day in their country is an adequate level of standard of living. In practice, as I quoted almost at the beginning, the UK government is funding 19 million children under 5 and pregnant women from going hungry. So it's not about relative poverty in developing countries, it's actually about funding them so that they don't starve.
Leanne, we need to pass you the mic because we're recording this and we can't hear it unless you have a microphone.
So I just wanted to say there are people starving in this country, hence the rise of food banks. So, and also I want to say, when you're talking about relative poverty, there's a strong rich-poor divide. So what are you doing about that? Because there's people living in, it is relative, but it's still not fair. That, for example, it was in the news that, you know, they called it Fat Cat Friday or something, where the richest people had earned most of what we had earned in just a few weeks. You know, they'd earned, you know, the average salary of, you know, 30,000 or something in just a few days. And that's what some people in Britain earn for the whole year. So I think we've got to look at this disparity. You know, there's a real disparity, and we shouldn't just dismiss it by saying, oh, it's relative. Because, you know, let's be honest, you all on the panel are not living in that relative poverty.
Well, can I just point out that under the present government, inequality has actually reduced. I agree with you, however, that it is something that any government needs to continue to address, because it's very clear that the countries where the level of inequality is the smallest tend to be the countries that are actually the healthiest, if I can put it that way, typically the Scandinavian countries.
I think you can also make another comparison, if you may. I mean, look at the banner for water aid. even people who are going to food banks and in the most desperate situation in this country have access to clean water. There are millions of children, possibly even 1 billion children and families in the world who don't have access to clean water. So I'm not going to use the term relative poverty, but I'm sure you see, if you haven't been there, you've seen pictures of countries where people are starving. There are people who are going short of food and hungry in this country, and it's a tragedy and it shouldn't be happening. But in other countries, there are whole swathes of people. We know this, you've seen it on the television, of people who are, millions of people starving, children dying of starvation, haven't had a meal for days. This country, we have a social service that supports families and supports people. And yes, sometimes they do slip through the loop. And yes, we've got to do more, and this government is trying to do so. But if you've been to places in the world where you see, I went to Sri Lanka after the tsunami and the situation there, you wouldn't say we shouldn't be doing everything to support them. And people in this country, when there are appeals, are very, very generous. The DEC, the Disaster Emergencies Committee, supports people in appalling situations around the world. So I don't think the two are separate. Yes, we've got to address poverty in this country, but we've also got to have a budget to support some of the most desperate situations all around the world. And I think it would be a dreadful shame if any political party was saying we shouldn't be supporting children and families starving in some of the poorest parts of the world.
To substantiate your figures there, Robert, 1 million children go to bed every night hungry. 900 billion people go to bed without clean water in the following morning. And 2.4 billion people don't have a toilet. So this is what we're comparing ourselves with. Those poor people that don't have water and don't have sanitation. Thank you, Robert. Suzanne?
Thank you. Well, let's go back to Leanne's question. It was, a quarter of children in the United Kingdom live in poverty. Should we be spending money abroad? Well, Leanne, I really don't think it's an either-or situation. I think we have responsibilities at home, but I do think we have responsibilities abroad as well. At home, at least we know where the money's going at home, so I think we should not hold back from looking to see what we can do in a very direct way to alleviate poverty. One of the ways in which UKIP wants to do this, first of all, is to make sure that all those families that are living on minimum wage are taken out of tax altogether. I think it's disgraceful that you can be working full-time, every day, full-time job, just getting paid a minimum wage, and then you get a tax bill as well. I think that's an insult. If we have decided that the minimum wage is the least amount that we need to live on, why the heck should we pay tax on it? So we would definitely want to see that personal allowance threshold raised. At the moment, that would be about £13,500, and I'm sure my Liberal Democrat, Tom, would agree with that sort of aspiration as well.
I think there's a consensus on the panel almost. I'm not sure what the Labour Party position is, but so
quite
we're all in
possibly.
agreement.
That's something that's very easy that we could do to help lift children out of poverty straight away. One of the other things, and so many people now in this country too are living in fuel poverty, and that does affect children. If you're a child, how do you do your homework if you're cold? How do you sleep at night if you're cold? And we've got to look at getting fuel bills down. Now, at least £93 at the moment of every fuel bill that every family in this country gets is because of green levies, which go into things like wind farms and solar arrays, which are actually pretty inefficient forms of energy. So we would want to get rid of those as well. They're set to rise to nearly £200 per family by 2020. And that again is a very simple way that we could remove those levies and cut fuel bills. It's about the cost of living. And ultimately what UKIP is about, and I'm proud of this, is about getting more money to keep more people to get more of their money kept in their pocket. I think there is an issue too about children going hungry, and I think it's appalling that teachers, my sister's a teacher, she sees kids turning up hungry, going home hungry. We've got to sort out this problem, and I think one of the ways we could do that is giving wraparound childcare. So we have breakfast clubs, we have after school and homework clubs where children are fed as well, and that would be really something that would really benefit kids in this country, I think.
Thank you very much, Susan.
Yeah, again, like it's been alluded as well, I'm very uncomfortable with the question that you compare one poor child, for example, a child that's in a poor country in Africa or Asia who has to walk maybe 8 miles every day to just get drinking water, compared with maybe a child whose mother is just lost her incapacity benefit because they just failed the fit for work test by Atos or something along those lines, and they're struggling as well. So what needs to happen is that we need to support both groups. Now, as a Green, when I hear statistics like 85 people on this planet have the same amount of wealth as the poorest 3.5 billion people on this planet, it disgusts me. And when I hear Boris Johnson talk about the amount of, and bragging about the amount of billionaires that live in London, and that are more than New York and Paris, it's quite abhorrent to hear that sort of thing. So we want to see inequality reduced in the Green Party. Now, one of the things we would do, policies we would do at home, well, one thing we would do is actually not have the austerity measures that all but 22 MPs yesterday voted for £30 billion worth of austerity measures, which is going to affect the poorest in our society and the most vulnerable. And again, the Green Party MP Caroline Lucas is one of those MPs, because it's not in her principle to do that, voted against it. Now, overseas, what we should be doing is actually looking at a Robin Hood tax, a tax on financial transactions. Now, I'm not talking about a 5% tax on transactions. I'm not talking a 0.5% tax on transactions. It's just 0.05% tax on financial transactions, and that will raise £250 billion. Foreign exchange markets where those big bankers that are exchanging the money. Are you opposed to that then? Why?
Because it's economically necessary.
How so? Can they not afford it?
If you tax financial transactions, like stamp duty on house purchase, it comes back and hits the ordinary people. If you tax the wealthy, then the ordinary people pay more. Look at the football players. Look at in France, they put the tax rate up to 75%, but footballers in France are on net pay deals. So they get the same money, but the club has to pay the extra tax, and the club goes bust. The punters have to pay the tax.
It's not relevant,
If you complain about...
It's not relevant.
You asked me the question,
I'll tell you about... Listen,
if you tax financial transactions, there is a massive burden of administration, and that money has to come from the transaction.
Is that because...
So when you buy your...
What's Douglas Carswell's former
job?
Oh, he's a banker, that was right.
I'm not concerned with that person. If you want to go abroad, you have to buy a foreign currency. If you have to pay another tax on it, your currency costs more.
Well, you make sure that you put legislation in to stop that from happening.
How?
Listen, if you have principle, you'll stop it. Because I am interested in stopping inequality, unlike maybe the UKIP party.